Hello there. Mark Mays and Private Eye were talking about the insulin results, how they basically just found some old erroneous insulin results. Private Eye was saying that Steve Breary discovered them, but actually it was I think we know it was Dr. ZA when she was on maternity leave, and then she sends Steve Breary an email saying, "Oh, by the way, there was this odd insulin result," and it sort of got me thinking about Dr. ZA. I've not got any huge revelations or anything, but I'm just going to have a little chat. So this was after the police investigation had started, just after. Dr. ZA emails him saying, "I remember a baby with high glucose requirements that seemed to fluctuate. Asta and I did a load of hyperglycemia bloods, and the insulin level was high, and the C-peptide suggested it could be exogenous insulin. It didn't make sense as the baby had never been prescribed insulin, and the hypoglycemia was better by the time the results were back, so I dismissed it. But it's been nagging at me recently." Now, what's a little bit interesting is I was reading the Thirlwall Inquiry, her statement there, and she never here mentions that they checked to see if any of the other babies on the ward were prescribed insulin, to see if it was an error and they'd mixed up the doses or anything like that. None of that's mentioned in that email there, but that is what she goes on to say in the Thirlwall Inquiry. I mean, if that is the case, I mean, kudos to her. I don't know who this we is. That's never quite expanded on. And quite annoyingly, in the Thirlwall Inquiry, sometimes they ask great questions, and then other times I think, come on, couldn't you have asked this? Couldn't you have asked that? I think actually they've got a pre-set number of questions, and they do tend to ask the same questions to the same consultants about, when was the first time you suspected Letby, and basically why didn't you tell the coroner? And of course none of them told the coroner. So we discussed how the blood results looked. Child F had been given exogenous insulin. We checked that it wasn't prescribed. Oh yeah, so to Child F, checked that it wasn't prescribed to Child F. We checked that no one else on the unit at the time was on insulin. Thinking about, was it done accidentally? So that gives credence to her, I think, for thinking that it definitely was exogenous insulin. But then at the same time, she goes on to say they couldn't repeat the blood samples because the baby had gotten better, then it would give a different blood sample. So I take it, they could only take very, very small samples. So I presume you can only do that test once with that small sample. And then she also says, due to the fact that the results are small, that they do get unusual results from time to time. But that's for insulin, but not for C-peptide. But it wasn't the C-peptide level that was off the roof. It was the insulin level that was off the scale on that. So, but what I wanted to talk about with Dr. ZA, Tom Evans, the other day, I'll put a link to it. He done a video, and he sort of linked a Star Trek TNG Next Generation episode to the case. But there's another Star Trek episode, and it's season 5, episode 19, and it's called The First Duty. And it's if you like Star Trek, well, even if you don't, actually, it's a very good Christian show with Christian values. And basically the synopsis is the cadets who, on my side, the consultants, were in Star Trek. This manoeuvre went wrong, and they decide, and there was going to be a public inquiry into it, because they were obviously doing something that they shouldn't be, but they've all banded together to make sure they get their stories straight. And one of them is the natural leader, and they're just sort of making sure that they're all going to be singing from the same hymn sheet.
Everything I said was the truth. The accident was not Josh's fault. It was my friend too, Wes. I worked to get him on this team, but the truth is,
and they're throwing
we don't know that.
One of them actually, one of the team members died, and they're actually throwing him under the bus. But yeah, it's very, very apt. But what I wanted to focus on with Dr. ZA is the unusual loyalty that she's giving to these consultants. I mean, so this is, you've got to bear in mind the time. So this is pre-Shuley conference, and it's after Letby's been convicted. So I guess now Dr. ZA is well entrenched in this. Letby done it, that's it. But even her recollections of before then seem a bit extreme. So now she's saying she's saying it did mean, the unit was so busy that Lucy could hide what she was doing with people being generally busy. I mean, what a way to throw them under the bus. And it's see, this is a good question. Delapole asks her, did you know about the Beverly Allitt case? And you knew, and she says, yeah. And you knew that insulin was what Beverly Allitt used to harm patients. And Dr. Zezé says, yes, I was aware of that. So that sort of gives us background that Dr. Zezé was aware that they could use this insulin for that. So I wanted to talk about some of the extreme positions she had. In so early 2016, bearing in mind quite a lot of the time she was on maternity leave, whether it was that point or earlier, some point earlier 2016, she says, I do recall someone mentioning the association of Letby with the number of deaths and collapses, but that being explained by the fact that she did more shifts and she was one of the few nurses with the intensive care qualifications who wasn't a shift leader, so was more likely to be looking after the sick babies. And she says, I think it might have been Steve Breary, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's sort of early in 2016. But come 1st of September 2016. And also she mentions here, so she says the concerns were coming from my colleagues, and come 2016, she was September 2016, the 1st of September the RCPCH review came in, and she was invited to this meeting, and again, brilliant, good question this time by Delapore. I haven't actually highlighted it, I missed it, but he basically asked, like, aren't you a bit of an odd choosing to be on the team, considering you'd been away and things. And she was like, oh yeah, it's more of a sort of step-in role, and didn't really answer it. But it said here, at this meeting, we were very open from the beginning of our meeting that so it's gone from them to now our concern was that Lucy Letby was doing something deliberate to harm babies. So by then she's in this group. And then she got called into they all got called into the management office. It very much seemed like we'd been called into the headmaster's office like naughty school children. Well, you absolutely were naughty school children. I mean, it's funny, if you're called into an office and you describe it like that, I mean, to me, I would only be describing it like that had I known I'd done something wrong. But and she says here, I very much took it, so when Tony Chambers said, he's drawing a line and you're not to cross it, Dr. Zade says, I very much took it to mention that if we continue to carry on raising our concerns, then my job would be at risk. And then they intimated that it was Dr. J.R. and Dr. Brewery putting pressure on me to go along with what they were saying, which I said that very much wasn't the case. Sorry, I've cut out a bit there. Interestingly, at this meeting, a couple of the top female execs took Dr. Zade to one side and said, intimated that it was J. Armour and Brewery putting pressure on her. And you don't have to be part of that gang, but she wasn't having any of it. She's well entrenched. She goes on to say, I think there was a false narrative developing that J.R.M. and Brewery were ringleaders, rather than we were all professionals who'd come to the same conclusion. We decided lots of sort of gang, sort of tribal mentality needed to continue to raise our concerns collectively as a group of 7. And she goes on to say, I couldn't live with myself. Was that if Lucy Letby wasn't working as a nurse or a similar position, and that someone had a forensic look at what had happened to these babies, as I felt that even if I lost my job, I should persist until we reached this outcome. So she was very adamant that they needed someone to do a forensic look at it. So she was extremely well entrenched. But what's interesting is her involvement. Partly, she'd been, like we say, she'd been on maternity leave, so she'd missed quite a lot of it. So what cases was she actually involved with? You would think from all this she must have experienced some things herself. Well, let me tell you. I'll go through exactly what cases she was involved with. The first one she was involved with was child E. Now, child E did die, and child E, Dr. ZA persuaded the parents not to bother having a post-mortem because she was sure it was NEC, necrotizing enterocolitis, if I've said that correctly. So at child E, the first death that she was involved with, she's absolutely sure, so sure, not even going to bother checking that it's NEC. That she was involved in two other occasions. One is that the next one is child F, which is the insulin one, which again, at the time, she completely dismissed. So at the time, there was never, before 2018 even, so before she'd been into these meetings, she said that it never even crossed her mind that anyone would put exogenous insulin had done any harm with the insulin. It was impossible. So we can cross that one off. So far we've got child E, which she was 100% sure died of NEC, and the other one she was involved with was child G. Now, child G didn't die, it collapsed, and in fact, when being asked, very briefly, you were involved in the care of child G. Do you recall child G? I would need reminding. So didn't even post trial didn't even remember the so-called collapse of child G, and that was her involvement. They was discussing child O and P in here. Like I say, she wasn't involved. So why? So she's got one collapse of a child. She was involved in one collapse of a child that she can't even remember. The insulin that she didn't even think about until the police started the investigation. And child E, she was so sure it was NEC, she signed the death certificate and didn't even bother with a post-mortem. And yet, for some reason, even though she'd been on maternity leave for most of this, she's absolutely entrenched in this tribal gang culture that it was definitely her throwing Lucy Letby under the bus. Very strange.